All right, so let's get our first turn started here. I'm going to grab my $25 million from the bank. And I know I need to get to the moon. I tend to kind of like to use Saturn and Atlas rockets. So I'm going to go ahead and buy the Atlas rocket achievement for 10 million. We'll throw 3 outcome cards on that. I'm going to just shuffle these up real quick. I have a lot of the components kind of off screen and out of the way, a little bit like a magician's table where there's a lot of stuff you probably don't see. This game's big. It's great. Takes up a lot of table space. I just love the way it looks. The art's so fantastic. I like seeing it on the table. It looks great. It may look a little cluttered for a video if I've got the locations, the calendar, my spacecraft, the missions, the money, the advancements, all the components. And a lot of those are covered in my first video, so I'm going to kind of leave those off the table here. The next thing I can do is buy some Atlas rockets. Problem is I've only got $15 million. Atlas rockets are 5, so if I bought them, I'm not going to have money left over to test fire them. But if I spend all 15 million of my dollars, I can buy 3 Atlas rockets and begin to test fire them next year. We've got 3 Atlas rockets. They're not really spacecraft yet, although if I wanted to, I could make each one of these a spacecraft with just 1 Atlas rocket, put all the tokens on Earth, and we'll launch them here and test them out. So at the start of the new year, I'm going to get another $25 million. It's a use it or lose it budget. We've got plenty of money here to remove successes and failures. Atlas rockets are cheap. Let's just get the first one fired. So I'm going to fire it. I'm going to reveal at random one of my outcome cards, and it's a major failure. This is why we test our components before we put people on them and try to go somewhere and do something with expensive payloads. So in the event of a major failure, there's an explosion that destroys the spacecraft. Luckily, the spacecraft is just our single Atlas rocket, so we discard the rocket and we spend $5 million to discard the major failure. So we won't be drawing that again. Don't look at the other 2. We're going to test fire our second rocket. So we shuffle up our outcome cards, pick one at random, another major failure. So we're off to a pretty rough start, but luckily these are just rockets and we're just testing them. So we spend another $5 million to discard that failure. And now we've only got one possible outcome left on our Atlas rocket, and if it's a success, we can discard it for free. So we'll launch the last Atlas rocket. A minor failure. Wow. So another $5 million to discard that minor failure. The rocket doesn't produce any thrust. Well, it says rocket damaged, provides no thrust. I'm curious if you just flip that Atlas over to its damaged side and it can be repaired. I'm going to have to ask a question about that in the forum, or if you know the answer, throw it in the comments at the bottom of the video here. I've never really paid attention to that because when you use a rocket, you're discarding it to get its thrust. So the token here in Earth, say we're trying to get to suborbital flight, it's a difficulty maneuver of 3. The Atlas rocket has a mass of 4. Difficulty times mass, 3 times 4 is 12. We need 12 thrust to get this token from Earth to suborbital flight fired up into the atmosphere. The Atlas rocket provides 27 units of thrust, so it's plenty of thrust, but in order to try to move this token from here to here, I believe you discard the rocket and then check the outcome. But I've always played that way, but as I notice on the Atlas rocket advancement, it says that the rocket is damaged, and there is the damaged side here. I'm wondering if you don't just flip it over. The rocket wouldn't leave Earth because it doesn't provide any thrust, and one of the things you can see about Earth is that at the end of the round, you get free repair. So I'm going to play it that way. I believe just by reading the interpretation of the cards that that's the right way to play it. So I'm really curious to see how that plays out. I'm going to flip this as damaged. We still have $10 million. Let's use that money on the Saturn rocket achievement. We're going to need the Saturn rocket to do some heavy lifting for us later in the game. Might as well spend our 10 million on that now. There's definitely some strategy as to what you buy, when you buy it, and how you use it. We've spent all our money. We don't have any more components. It's the end of the year. I'm going to repair that Atlas rocket. We're going to go to 1958. And we're going to get another $25 million. Now, testing Saturn rockets is expensive because they're $15 million each. So before we start buying and testing Saturn rockets, let's start to look at a strategy here. We need to do a lunar survey to pick up that easy mission for 4 points. We need the survey advancement, which is 10 million. We need probes, which we can't buy until we get the survey advancement. And then we're going to be able to send up a mass of 5 with a single Saturn rocket. If you look on the Space Agency card, we can look at the difficulty of 8 to go directly from Earth to Earth orbit. The Saturn rocket at a difficulty 8 can carry a payload of 5 mass. If we look at the probe has a mass of 1, the Atlas has a mass of 4. So we could boost a single Atlas and a probe into Earth orbit. From Earth orbit, we can get to lunar orbit with a difficulty of 3, and from lunar orbit, we could survey the moon. An Atlas rocket with a difficulty of 3 can carry a mass of 5. So let's spend our next 10 million on that survey advancement. That's going to get us in the position to be able to launch a usable payload when we're testing that Saturn rocket. So there's the surveying. Surveying only gets one outcome card, but there are some gotchas with surveying we'll probably see later in the game. Now that we have surveying, we can buy a probe, but we've only got 15 million, and if we buy a probe, we're going to be left over with an odd amount of money, and I tend to like to sink my leftover dollars into supplies, but we don't have the life support purchase yet. If we bought that with 10 million, we'd only have 5 million left. We could use that on an astronaut, but we don't really need astronauts yet. We need probes. So I'm going to spend this 15 million on a single Saturn rocket, and that'll be the end of the year there. All right, so we're starting 1959 with $25 million and a two-stage rocket, basically an Atlas rocket sitting on top of a Saturn rocket. I'm going to spend $2 million on a probe, and now the probe and the Atlas rocket combined have a mass of 5. The Saturn rocket can boost that directly into Earth orbit. So this is what we're going to try to do up to Earth orbit. Put out our Saturn rocket cards, pick one at random, and it's a success. Now it's $10 million to remove those successes. And strategy-wise, sometimes I don't like to remove a success because it may be the only one in there. And in something with like life support, you might want to have a 33% chance of drawing a success. But the rockets, they're too expensive, they blow up too much, so I like to discard those successes. I also like to try to send a usable payload up because it was a success, and now we have our Atlas, fully tested Atlas rocket in Earth orbit. And we can discard the Atlas to maneuver to lunar orbit. From lunar orbit, we can survey the moon. There's only one outcome card on the survey, so we flip that and take a look. It's a success as well. You remove successes for free. So now we have our second fully tested advancement, surveying. And since we surveyed the moon, we flip over the moon location and we reveal that microbes inhabit the lunar regolith. So if we had pulled that extraterrestrial life mission, this would be a great place to bring back a sample. We don't have to go that far. We've got life right here on the moon, right in our own backyard. We don't have that mission, but I do really like that mission. We can take that mission, and we're 4 points closer to victory here. The other thing that we need to look at is we need to bring a lunar sample back. We can leave that probe in lunar orbit, and you might be wondering why I didn't just do a lunar flyby. I want to test landing. Landing is not optional on the moon, so I can test the landing advancement later, and since it's just a probe, I can leave it orbiting the moon as long as I want until I'm ready to test landing, then I'll just drop it into the moon and test it. Had I done the less difficult maneuver of going to the lunar flyby, at the end of the year I would have lost that probe because I don't have any thrust to get back into Earth orbit or move into lunar orbit. Now I've got an odd amount of money. I have $13 million. I'm going to buy the life support advancement for 10 million, which allows me to purchase supplies. And that's going to let me not waste that last $3 million because this 3 million is going to go into supplies, which are 1 million each. I'll need them eventually, so I might as well buy them now. So I got my 3 supplies. It's the end of the year. We'll advance to 1960. And let's see what we can do in 1960. Let's look at trying to do a lunar sample return. We need the landing advancement. I'm going to go ahead and buy it because at some point we're probably going to want to land, and I want to use this as a chance to test landing. So we have our landing advancement, 3 cards on it. Pick one at random, 3, and it's a success. We'll discard that success for 10 million, the other 2 back, drop our probe onto the lunar surface. We now have a mass of 2. We don't need to bring the probe back, so we need to get a mass of 1 off of the moon at a difficulty of 2, and a Juno rocket can do that. And if we are in lunar orbit, that's a difficulty 3 maneuver to Earth orbit. We know an Atlas can do that. So we need to get an Atlas into lunar orbit and a Juno down on the moon. That's a mass of 5. But then they've also got to go from Earth orbit to lunar orbit. So when you start to look at these heavier payloads like that, I like to do 2 Saturns, which is a $30 million rocket. It's going to have a usable payload of 26 mass, I believe. The first Saturn is only at a difficulty of 3, and it can do 46, but 20 of that is the second Saturn. So we're going to have a usable payload of about 26, because the second Saturn at a difficulty of 5 is 20. I've got 5 million I don't know what to do with. I'm going to buy an astronaut. Let's go with John Glenn, because he's going to give us +1 to landing and rendezvous attempts, which we will start doing at some point. So 1961. Let's buy that first stage of the Saturn. Some of these years go awfully fast when you're buying Saturn rockets, and we've got 10 million left. Let's pick up the rendezvous advancement because we're going to be docking and undocking, and that's the end of that year. 1962. Let's buy another stage to our Saturn rocket. And now we've got 10 million left and we can start to look at those payloads. We need 2 Atlas rockets and they're 5 million each, so that will do it for this year as well. Now 1963, another 25 million. We're going to spend 10 of it on the Juno advancement. And the reason we're going with the Juno is it's so light. That's going to be great for getting us on and off the surface of the moon. It's a nice little light rocket. Juno rockets are fairly cheap, so we're going to buy some of them right now. The problem is testing them. It can be expensive to test these guys. So a Juno rocket's only $1 million. We need at least 4 of them. I'm just going to buy 5 because the math works out so nice. We have $10 million left for testing. Let's just fire one of these Juno rockets, check out one of the outcomes, and it's a success. So our 10 million is going to go to the success of that Juno rocket. We're out of money again. 1964. So this is where 1972 looks like it might start to sneak up on you. If you want to do that grand tour or launch a probe or a Galileo probe that's going to be able to survey all of those planets. We're in pretty good shape with the Saturn and the Atlas and the surveying already being tested. Actually, we've got two outcome cards left on the Saturn. Let's get these other Junos tested though. So I'm going to fire one, pick an outcome card at random. Also a success. So another 10 million to discard that. We'll fire our last Juno rocket. It's a success. We discard it for free, which is nice. Now I'm going to take one of the 2 remaining Junos and put it in the second stage of that Saturn. So payload wise, we have 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. We can take another mass of 11. You can put up supplies and leave them Earth orbit and rendezvous with them later and send them off on their way. Supplies are pretty cheap, but if we look at the mass of this, if this Saturn rocket has a major failure, it's going to take about $36 million worth of payload up with it. It's a pretty big gamble, but time is getting kind of late and money is getting tight. So I'm going to buy 11, no, I'm going to send some probes up. So let's look at the calendar. 1964 is a slingshot year for Jupiter, which is what the red symbol here means. And we aren't going to have another till 1966. So in 2 years, if we are in Earth orbit, it's 1 year to enter and 1 year to Venus flyby. So if we can get a Galileo probe launched now, we could get it on its way. The problem is I really like to use ion thrusters for moving probes, and we just don't have enough money, and the ion thruster itself is 10 million. So we'd need at least 20, and then we wouldn't have money left for the probe, and our payload would be really expensive if we were to lose it and damage it. So I'm going to buy $11 million worth of supplies to finish the loadout of my spacecraft at a mass of 40, and I'm going to double check that. 20, 30, 35, 40. So that rocket is at capacity. We have 4 million left. This is what gets me on this game. The math is so tight. We just dumped a bunch of money into supplies, and what I would love to do is buy an astronaut. I don't need an astronaut, but if I only have a little bit of money left over, I'd like to get an astronaut. I only have 4 million left, but an astronaut's 5 million. I could send up 10 supplies instead of 11 and buy the astronaut. It's just so darn expensive to boost stuff off of Earth that I hate to send a payload that's less than full. The odds are that that's going to be enough supplies though. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna take off one supply. That gives me I'm gonna put that back in the bank. That gives me 5 million to spend on another astronaut. And the second astronaut I'm gonna buy is going to be a medic. And I'll take Wally. So Wally and John Glenn aren't going anywhere yet, but they're getting ready. And the reason I didn't launch that big Saturn rocket yet is because I want to have money left over to deal with discarding outcome cards. Here we go. Let's launch this first stage of our Saturn rocket. An outcome card at random. Oh, a major failure. Look at that. So on a major failure, it's an explosion that destroys the spacecraft. So what we lose is 15 million in the second stage Saturn, 10 million in Atlas rockets, 1 million in Junos, and 10 million in supplies. So 10, 20, 35, $36 million we just lost. On top of having to pay 5 million to discard the major failure, and we used up that Saturn rocket too. So man, that really set me back. It would have been cheaper maybe to test Saturns by firing them off on their own, or maybe firing them with a cheaper payload. I could have done a difficulty 8 maneuver straight to Earth orbit with a mass of 5 and sent up a single card of 5 supplies. I got greedy, and sometimes you got to take risks in this game, and sometimes they don't pay off. So that was frustrating. I have one outcome card left on the Saturn. I'm going to take 15 of my remaining 20 million and buy a Saturn rocket, start rebuilding this thing, and then the other 5 million I'm going to spend on an Atlas, and that'll be the end of that year. All right, 1966, 25 million. 15 of it's going to go to the second stage of the Saturn. That leaves me with 10. So I basically have a two-stage, two Saturn rocket. 5 is going to go for another Atlas. One of those is going to be for a Juno. Let's spend 4 million on supplies. So 4 supplies. Now our current payload is 20, 30, 33. That's going to be good enough. We're going to go to 1967 so that we have funds to deal with the final outcome card of that Saturn rocket. It's a success. We discard it for free. Now our Saturn rockets are fully tested. The first stage gets the spacecraft to suborbital flight. The second stage is successful. That gets us to Earth orbit. Now we need to undock these supplies from the Atlas and Juno rockets. We're going to make 2 spacecraft out of that. So we pick an outcome card at random, a minor failure. So a minor failure on a rendezvous means no docking or separating, and you damage a chosen component. You can't damage supplies. I would love to. And thinking this through a little bit better, what I should have done, I had this extra Juno rocket that I'd already paid for, and I had room on the spacecraft. I had 7 masts I could have launched, but I didn't because I was in a hurry. And I'm planning this in my head instead of using those really cool mission planning pads that the new expansion came with, or a calculator or anything like that. Again, I'm paying a price. The first time I just took a risk. The second time I didn't think my mission through very well because I only brought with me what I need, and I have to damage one of these components now. Had I brought another Juno rocket, I could have damaged it and tried again to separate. I still can, and I'm going to pay 5 million to discard that minor failure. But the problem is now I can't get to the moon and back and get that lunar sample returned because I don't have the thrust. Let's try to undock again. This time I'm trying to just undock the Juno, and that's a success. We're going to discard that, and the Juno is undocked. And what we're going to do is let that fall back to Earth, where we can repair it for free. Now I'm going to try to undock the Atlas rockets from the supplies. It's a success. You discard your last success for free. And now I have 4 supplies floating in space, and I have my 2 Atlas rockets also floating in space, which need to be hooked up with a Juno. Looking at this, I didn't quite do the math right because I'm going to have to get down from lunar orbit. So to get down from lunar orbit, I'm going to need 2 Junos, one to thrust the ascent Juno down to the moon, which will be consumed, and then that second Juno will go back up with the sample. I am very far into the game without accomplishing a lot. Let's buy the ion thrusters. I am going to use that, and I'm going to need it soon if I want to get those advanced probes on their way. Alright, now we go to 1968. So we need a Saturn at 15 million. The nice thing is that the single stage Saturn only needs to get a mass of 5, and we only need 2 Juno rockets, but I'm going to send 5 so I can practice docking and undocking and damage them if I need to. I need 4 Juno rockets at 4 million, which is going to leave me with 6 million. I already have 1 Juno, that's why I'm only buying 4. And these 5 Juno rockets are going to become the payload of my single stage Saturn, which will go directly to Earth orbit. You know, we can do this year. So let's do this. The Saturn is fully tested. We discard it to go from Earth to Earth orbit. We're going to try to separate 2 of the Juno rockets as a single spacecraft. Rendezvous is fully tested, so that's going to be the separation's automatic and the joining is automatic. And now let's take a look at moving this spacecraft from Earth orbit to lunar orbit. It's a difficulty 3, and the mass is, oh, look at the math on this. So we have 2 Atlases at 8 and 2 Junos at 2 for a total mass of 10. 10 times 3, the difficulty of moving a lunar orbit is 30, and an Atlas provides us with 27 thrust. So we need to pick up 3 thrust somewhere. Let's see if adding a single Juno rocket will do it. The problem is the Juno's got mass too, so the thrust to weight ratio isn't always clear. It's almost a bit of a calculus problem here. So if we have a mass of 11, we need 33 thrust. We were 3 shy. We're going to be 6 shy when we add a single Juno. No, I'm sorry, we're going to be 2 shy. So if we add another Juno, and our weight is 12, 12 times 3 is 36, and we have 27, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35. So it can be done by adding Juno rockets, but we only have 1 more. So a mass of 13 times 3 is 39, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 35. 36, 38, 39. We can do it. The problem is we've got to test fire these three. Oh no, we did fully test the Juno rockets. Excellent. I was worried they were untested and we were going to be firing these puny little Juno rockets and it'd take down the whole stack here. But my Juno and my Atlas rocket advancements are both fully tested. So I'm going to discard a single Atlas, which will give me 27 thrust, and three Junos, which gives me 12 thrust, for a combined total of 39 thrust. We discard all those rockets, and we are now in lunar orbit. We want to separate in lunar orbit a single Atlas, and then our little craft now is just two Juno rockets, a mass of 2, times a difficulty of 2 is 4. The Juno provides 4 thrust. We discard one Juno, and we are on the surface of the moon with a Juno rocket. Or are we? Because we have not tested landing, we need to make a landing check. I've only got $6 million, and let's see how it goes. A minor failure on landing. Had we sent one of our pilot astronauts, he could have bumped that minor failure up to a success. But we have a rough landing. Damage the chosen component. Now the only component in our spacecraft is our Juno rocket, which is now damaged on the surface of the moon and not repairable without a mechanic and his own supplies. So this game is really giving me a beating tonight. I'm going to discard 5 million to get rid of that minor failure. We only have one outcome left on our landing, which is nice. And we only have $1 million, which I will spend on a single supply. And we can say goodbye to 1968. 1969, I'm just going to move this damaged Juno onto the probe in the moon sample so I can get my token back. So this should make the series sample return pretty easy. We'll have fully tested all the tech we need on the moon first, although pretty much anything that could go wrong has. So we're going to spend 15 million on a Saturn, and now we need to get some Juno rockets to the moon. Now the bummer is 2 Juno rockets. If we try to go from Earth orbit to lunar orbit, 2 Juno rockets is a mass of 2. 2 times the difficulty of 3 is 6. A single Juno provides 4 thrust, so we have to use an Atlas to get the Junos into lunar orbit. Do we have any Atlas rockets? No, not on Earth anyway. So those cost 5 million. Oh, the math is so tight on this game. It's difficult. I like it, but it just blows me away because if we do that single shot with our single Saturn, we've only got room now for a mass of 1, and we need 2 Juno rockets, but we can only get 1 up there unless we go with lighter stage rockets or multiple stages, and then we're getting into untested rocket. I've got 5 million. I'm going to buy 5 more Junos and call that the end of the year. All right, it's 1970. We've got 2 years to get our act together before we need to get that probe launched. So what I'm going to do is actually take a break from this moon fever of trying to get this sample back, spending a decade on an 8-point mission here. And we do have the ion thrusters, and the Saturn is fully tested. So I'm going to send up, I wish I'd thought of this. Lunar orbit has an optional time marker on it. So I'm going to, instead of the Atlas, I've already bought it. It's coming off. I'm going to spend 10 million on an ion thruster. That's got a mass of 1. The Saturn's fully tested. There's no risk in us losing this. I'm going to spend another 10 million on another ion thruster. There's 3. I'm going to throw 2 supplies on there. There's our payload of 5. We're going to fire that Saturn. It's fully tested. It works. Get to the Earth orbit. I'm going to undock the supplies and redock them with the other supplies that are sitting there in Earth orbit. There's 6 supplies up there now. I'm going to undock one of the ion thrusters, and it's just going to be sitting in Earth orbit. This Juno would have fallen back to Earth and been repaired. Just missed it. since it's on the game board there. Did I do that wrong again? I did. Unbelievable. I still need 2 Juno rockets. I should have brought one less supply. So I have 2 Juno rockets. I have 5 Juno rockets in my hand. I'm going a little fast because I'm recording the video and I'm not being meticulous and methodical about planning my missions. I'm going to cheat for the sake of the video and I'm going to discard one of the supplies that I boosted to Earth and I'm going to replace it with a second Juno rocket. I would not do this if I was playing on my own, but for the sake of the video, I want to get this going and I'm rushing a little bit, so I'm going to allow for a little bit of a fudge. It's not like I'm changing a major failure into a success. I'm just changing what I boosted the same turn so that I have a better outcome here. Anyway, not what I like to do. I need to get the mission going here. So what I'm going to do, I have 2 Juno rockets and 1 ion thruster. That's a mass of 3. That we're going to do a difficulty 3. That's going to take 2 years for that ion thruster to push those 2 Juno rockets into lunar orbit. I don't want to take 2 years. I was hoping push these there and have these back in Earth orbit by 1972 to get a probe on its way to the outer planets. So I'm going to dock with this second ion thruster. So I have 2 ion thrusters now. Now my ship has a mass of 4. 4 times 3 is 12. 2 thrusters only produce 10. So the extra mass is going to slow it down enough that it's still going to take 2 years. So we might as well undock this again, put it back, leave it there if we want to boost other stuff and other stuff can use it and take off. Now we're back to a mass of 3. A difficulty of 3 is 9. We produce 5 thrust. It's going to take it 2 years. We put 2 time tokens on that craft, and then we need to fire that 1 ion thruster and see if it produces any thrust for us. It will be questionable the way this game's been going. A major failure. Okay, so there's going to be a weird little jump here in the video. As I was editing, I noticed I'd played a part of a turn incorrectly. When my ion thruster had a major failure, I incorrectly destroyed the entire spacecraft, when in reality the only thing that should have happened is that that ion thruster is flipped over to its damage side and it doesn't produce any thrust. I caught the mistake. It doesn't impact gameplay, but it was a gap in the continuity of the game that I wanted to come back and fix here. So that token is going to change. It's going to be the little satellite. It's still in Earth orbit. We've still got the 2 Juno reactors, and they have a damaged ion thruster with them. Good news is I have 5 million to discard the major failure. This has been the roughest game I have ever played of leaving Earth. It's still fun even when you're taking a beating though. It's a little, if you've played Dwarf Fortress, this is kind of an obscure reference, but the motto for that game is losing is fun. And this still is fun. I've not really had this much tech go this badly for me before. Next time you play, it leads you to reevaluate how you may plan your missions, the order that you would purchase your tech, how you test it, what you focus on. Now here we are in 1971. I've got 1 year to meet the launch window to get that probe going, and I don't really have viable technology that is going to match the missions that are on the board, other than the series mission eventually. We basically have, boy, no time to get the survey mission started and going. Hindsight, what I probably should have done was focus a little bit more on the ion thruster and the survey technology, get that all set up, have it just waiting in Earth orbit, and then these probes and surveys take so long to complete that I could have been hammering away at the moon and Ceres missions while my probes went out and did their job. So let's switch gears and think about what we need to do to have a successful survey mission. We need, if we look at the window here, we need to leave Earth in 1972, which is next year. Boy, we need 15 million for, that's just not enough money. Well, it will be. 15 million for a Saturn, 10 million for another ion thruster, payload of 1. We're out of money. 1972. 25 million, and this is the year we need to leave Earth to get those outer planet survey missions done. I'm going to buy Galileo probe on the off chance that some of the locations we reveal need that. Now the Galileo is 5 million and it's a mass of 2. So we can take 2 of them on our launch here with the Saturn, and we will, leaving us 15 million for other things, maybe ion thruster stuff. So let's see how this goes. We're going to launch our Saturn. It's a success. It's fully tested. We're going to dock this ion and 2 Galileo probes with the other ion already in Earth orbit, and it's going to give us a mass of 6. We may need to jettison things. So a mass of 6 going to the inner planets times a difficulty of 3 is 18. And we're going to produce 10 thrust. So that is going to take us 2 years. We need to leave Venus in 74. So we are okay on that. Let's do that. So it's going to take 2 years. We're trying to go to interplanetary transfer. We have to check the outcome on 2 ion thruster cards because we're using 2 engines. They both have to be a success. The first one's a minor failure. Man, I just can't believe this. That first ion thruster is damaged, so let's get rid of that minor failure. I have to damage the ion thruster, and I may leave it up in Earth orbit. So let's see, a mass of 5 times 3 is 15. That would take us 3 years. That's unacceptable, so we do have to separate the probe. Now we have a mass of 3. Difficulty of 3 is 9. Still going to take us 2 years. We're going to fire our last ion thruster, check our last outcome card. It's a success. We discard it for free. We're going to move to interplanetary transfer, and you'll get to see how part of the game works. We've got 10 million left. Probably need re-entry or aero braking at some point. Ceres does not have an atmosphere, so we don't need re-entry. Probably need aero braking, so I'm just going to go ahead and spend my last 10 million on the aero braking advancement. Throw 3 outcomes. This outcome deck's got to be nothing left but successes after all of these failures. And it's the end of the year. We remove a time token from our spacecraft. We've launched our 1 Galileo probe. We could probably launch. I'm going to let this ion engine fall back to Earth at the end of last year and repair it for free. They're 10 million. I'm not going to put an astronaut up there and fix it, I don't think. It's light enough, I'll just reboost it. And, you know, my headphones are wearing out battery-wise, so I think this is going to be a good place to stop for me for recording tonight. Next time we'll pick it up in 1973. Hopefully we are into the outer planets phase of the game, although I'm not set up very well for it.